Well, I want to suggest that maybe the most dangerous word in the English language is the word someday. Someday, I'll be the father I always intended to be. Someday, I'll quit complaining and learn to be grateful. Someday, I'll eat healthy and exercise regularly. Someday, I'll slow down and I'll start spending quality time with my kids or with my grandkids. Someday, I'll get serious about prayer. Someday, I'll read the Bible instead of watching TV. Someday, I'll get organized. Someday, I'll take risks. Someday, I'll be generous. Someday, I'll do what God is calling me to do. Someday. You know, some people live their whole lives waiting for that someday. Someday when I graduate, someday when I get a job, someday when I get married, someday when I have kids, someday when the kids move away, someday when I retire. Someday I'll stop waiting and I'll actually start living. You know, I want to talk today in this message about an attitude of being fully alive and fully present in the here and now, in this moment, of occupying wholly this present moment as God's gift to you, because this present moment is really all you have. Yesterday is gone and nothing can bring it back. You won't get that back. Tomorrow is not here yet, and it may never be. All you have is this moment. I was at a memorial service this week for a friend who died. She was young. She was 54 years old, and she died suddenly of a heart attack. And I'm not telling you this to scare you into living like you don't know if you have tomorrow, although that's true. I'm telling you this because while we were at this service, everything that was said about her was she lived her life like every day was her last. She lived with no regrets. There was no distinction between a normal day and a special occasion with her. Every day was a special occasion. And I remember walking away from that service just inspired to live like every day is a special occasion. Frederick Buechner, he writes in the last analysis, all moments are key moments. All moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. Every moment, the big, obvious, dramatic ones, and the real small, apparently insignificant ones. Every moment is key. Every moment is precious. Every moment is a gift to you and to me. And we must live them to the fullest. The alternative is to live for some day that may never come. And my guess is in this room, there's a fair amount of us who are suffering from what might be called someday syndrome. We're just waiting to live. And our word for this in our day is the word procrastination. We just put stuff off. We live for someday. And my guess is this is pretty widespread, and so I want to do a little survey. I want to ask everyone in here who has ever procrastinated in any area of your life to raise your hand, and we're just going to do like a mass confession. Not yet. Someday. We have plenty of time. All right, so just in a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. If you have ever had a project around your house that you intended to complete, but you haven't gotten to it yet. If you've ever put off returning a phone call or writing a letter that you knew you had to do. If you ever delayed making a doctor's appointment because you were afraid maybe there's something wrong with you. If you've ever been late for an appointment, or for an example, a church service. If you're not sure what we're talking about because you just got here. If you've ever gone Christmas shopping on December 24th, if you've ever mailed in your income tax returns on April 15th, if you haven't planned a winter vacation with your kids, if you're not sure it's winter, if you're not sure you have kids, if you ever decided to put off going on a diet because it wasn't Monday yet, if your 7-year-old daughter's birthday is this week and you haven't bought a birthday present yet, that's me. If you have ever procrastinated in any area of your life, would you just raise your hand right now? Just like mass confession. How many of you intended to procrastinate, you just haven't gotten around to it? Anyone in that category? Well, I want to give you a definition of procrastination today. I was thinking about this definition last night when I started working on this message. Procrastination is the failure to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. It's the failure to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. So you can procrastinate even if you're a real busy person. Think about it. You know what you should do. You plan on doing it. You want to do it. Your heart is set on doing it. You just don't actually do it. It's like the kamikaze pilot who flew 17 missions. You kind of have to think about that one for a moment. Here's a procrastinator. He's a busy guy. He just didn't do what needed to be done when it needed to be done. Now, some of you suffer from this someday syndrome in subtle ways. You find your life feels kind of hectic. It's like you're always behind. You're constantly rushing. Details slip through the cracks. You experience little twinges of regret. Some of you suffer from this in major ways in your life. Some of you have lost jobs because of this. Some of you have experienced major financial setbacks because of this. Because you don't do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Or you've suffered relational heartbreak because of this. And I'm here to say today, I believe the biggest problem with this procrastination, kind of someday syndrome, is it robs you of living life right here and right now. You spend your whole life obsessing about what you should have done or what you ought to do in the future, that you don't hear God's voice in this moment. You don't feel God's touch in this moment. You don't experience God's grace in this moment. And the great danger is you'll never become what God intended for you to be. Procrastination is ultimately a sneaky, subtle way of saying no to God and His call on your life. No, I will not be what you want me to be today. No, I will not receive this moment as a gift from you and surrender it back to you right now. And it's not obvious, maybe. It's not like turning your back on God or like shaking your fist in the face of God, but it amounts to saying no to God's will for your life. In the Bible, there's a statement, and it's really quite scary, actually. It's in the New Testament, in the book of James, James 4:17. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. It's a pretty scary statement. Have you ever known the right thing to do and you haven't done it? It covers a lot of things. James says that it's a very serious thing to know the thing that you ought to do, but to put it off for some other time. It's saying no to God. And this is a real serious thing that we're talking about today. It will rob you of your life. And what I want to do in this message is simply address two questions. One of them is why. Like, why do I procrastinate when the costs are so high? When I know it will keep me from being who God wants me to be or prevent me from living life to the fullest? Like, why do I do it? And the other question is, how do I change? How do I learn to live life in the here and now? How do I learn to receive every moment of my life as a gift from God and offer that back to Him? So number one, why do I procrastinate? Number two, how do I change? And so let's talk about the why. Why, when the costs are so high, do people procrastinate? And on this one, I want to walk us through 5 causes or 5 personality styles, really, that are factors that contribute to this tendency to procrastinate. And I've adapted this from a work of an author and researcher named Linda Sapadin. And I just want you to do some diagnostic work on this. And I'd like to see, which one of these actually applies to you, all right? So I want to ask you to take out a pen and paper, and then we're going to work through these together. Or you can do it later if you want. No, take out a piece of paper now. We're going to actually do this now. You can write down each one of these, and then just kind of next to it, just write yes or no. So yes, this tends to be a part of my personality, and it contributes to the problem that I have with living now. So we're just going to walk through these 5 personality styles that will contribute to this someday syndrome. And just indicate on the sheet of paper, yes or no for each one of them. This will help you to get a grip on the why. All right, so the first personality style that contributes to procrastination is the perfectionist. And it's okay to nudge the person next to you if you feel like they suffer from this particular syndrome. If this is you, you don't want to start or finish a task until you're able to do it the way that you have to do it so that it meets impossibly high standards. You find yourself putting off starting stuff or putting off completing stuff because you don't want to let it go until it's perfect. And of course, it's never perfect, and so you never let it go. And there's a classic statement from Scripture. The writer of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament puts it like this: farmers who wait for perfect weather never plant. He's essentially saying, if you wait for the perfect conditions, you'll never get anything done. That's right from the Bible. And some of you are perfectionists, and you need to be liberated from this. I read one author this week who said, here's what you need to do if this is you. You need to deliberately make at least one mistake every day to be liberated from this. So go home and go to the silverware drawer and put a spoon in the fork pile. Like, just do that. That'll be like your first step to liberation. Some of you are sitting next to a perfectionist that really can't let go of it, and so I just want to ask you to reach over and mess up their hair a little bit. Here's the question: do I put off doing tasks until I can do them perfectly, or until there's the perfect time to do them? Yes or no? You just kind of have to own up to that one. That's a perfectionist. The second personality style that contributes to procrastination is the dreamer. And there are a fair number of dreamers in this room, I would suspect. Dreamers want life to be easy and pleasant. They just expect that life ought to be that way. Dreamers will say, don't bother me with the details. I'm not a detail guy. I'm a big picture guy. I prefer to keep things vague and general and big and grandiose. And reality involves these little details that I don't like all that much. And if this is you, you would be happy to manage your finances if it didn't involve so darn much math. You're just a dreamer. You would do it, but there's all this little frustrating stuff. You like life to work easily. Okay, so the question here is, do I think too much about things that I'd like to do, but I often don't get around to doing them? I think about them, I dream about them, I fantasize about them, but I don't actually get around to doing them. That's a dreamer. Yes or no? And you may have multiple ones of these, so just you can check yes for multiple ones. The third personality style that contributes to this someday syndrome is the crisis maker. Some of you are crisis makers, and you're people that get motivated because you're in the middle of a crisis. This is kind of a fun person to be around. If this is you, you have this psychological need to live on the edge. Procrastination is actually a form of adventure for you. You're not really motivated until like the 11th hour. Your blood starts pumping because it's like do or die. You're an adrenaline junkie. You make everything into a contest. You put off studying for an exam until the night before. You decide that you're going to pull an all-nighter just to see if you can do it. This is the kind of person who says, I don't get motivated until I'm under pressure. This is an exciting person to be around. Some of you are married to a crisis maker. And the question here is, do I put off doing what needs to be done until a crisis develops? I just don't get motivated until the deadline is like right there. And some people are that way. Yes or no? The next personality type that contributes to procrastination is the defier. The defiant person. The defier is a rebel who wants to buck the rules. If this is you, you find yourself thinking things like, who's the government to tell me that I have to pay my taxes on April 15th? I'm in charge of my life. You're not the boss of me. Procrastination is a way that you've discovered to assert your independence, just to let authorities know that you are not going to submit to them. And so the question here is, do I ever think that I'm special or that I should not have to do things that other people have to do? I'm unique. I'm in my own category. I shouldn't have to follow the rules. That's the defier. It's your way of declaring independence. So yes or no on that one? Do you have any of that in you? The last personality type that contributes to this problem is the overdoer. Overdoers end up procrastinating because they take on way too much stuff. They just say, like, pile it on me. Like, put another load on my back. They're unwilling to establish priorities. They're unwilling to stick to focused goals. They're unwilling to say no. And they have a long, long list of things that they have to do, and they really think that they're going to get around to them all. If this is you, part of your problem is you've never learned to tell time realistically. You're way too optimistic about what you can do. This is the kind of person who says, oh, you can make it to San Francisco from here in 30 minutes if there's no traffic. I mean, when is there no traffic? But if this is you, you just plan on there being no traffic. And overdoing has become just a way of life for you. And the question here is, do I commit myself to so many things that I can't find time for a significant number of them? And if you're saying yes to that, then that means you're an overdoer. Now, just for my own curiosity, how many of you would say you have to own up to at least one of these 5 categories? Would you just raise your hand? Would you keep your hand up if you have to own up to 2? How about 3? Just raise your hands real high. 4? Anyone get a perfect score? Anyone want to tell me tomorrow? So here's the deal. This tendency to live for someday and to put off doing what needs to be done gets real deeply wired into us. And you're going to have to get real intentional to cultivate a new attitude on this one. This could change your life, I believe, if you do this. You can learn to receive moments from God as gifts from God and live in those moments, but you have to make a decision. It's not going to come out of nowhere. Like the motivation fairy is not going to sprinkle some motivation dust on you and you'll discover one day that you learned how to live in the now. You'll really have to be quite serious about this change in your life and you'll have to make a decision. And so what I want to do is spend the remaining moments that we have talking about this on how do I overcome procrastination? How do I learn to live in the here and now, in this moment? And we'll walk through a few practices, a few new habits that I'll have to cultivate to do this. And the first one is something that you have to stop doing. If I want to learn to live in the here and now, I must stop excusing procrastination in my life. Chronic procrastinators are quite quick to rationalize their behavior on the grounds that there is just nothing they can do about this. That's just the way I am, they'll say, as if there's some gene for procrastinating that just causes them to do this. And people who know procrastinators will even say, that's just who they are. Oh, they're just always late for stuff. Chronic procrastinators will look for any pretext to excuse putting off something that they want to do. If there's one thing that needs to be done, you'll find 15 other things that have been on the list for you to do for months, but all of a sudden those things just look so irresistible. You're just so motivated to do them because you're looking for any excuse to not do the one thing that you need to do. And this can get pretty ridiculous. The Bible talks about this. The writer of Proverbs says, the lazy person claims, there's a lion out there. If I go outside, I might be killed. That's a great excuse, isn't it? Try that one on your boss sometime this week. I wanted to come in, but the whole lion thing is going on. Proverbs 22:13. Learned about it this weekend. Better stay at home and be safe. I don't want to risk it. And the Bible has some humor here. It's saying that this is part of the human condition. This is like we want to make excuses so that we're not doing the things that we need to do. I'll do it when everything settles down. I'll do it when I get inspired. Okay, so the first step is just to stop all the rationalizations. Stop all the excuses. Say, I'm going to take responsibility for my time, and I'm going to take responsibility for my actions, and I'm going to take responsibility for my life. And I'll own it. I will not give it to anyone else. This is between me and God, and I'm going to need His help to do this, but the ball is in my court. That's the first step. You have to say, I'm going to cut off from all the rationalizations and all the excuses, and I'm going to focus on starting now. And which is the second practice involved in this commitment, this whole action statement, which I'm going to summarize in this phrase: start today. Commit yourself to taking action in the area where you've been procrastinating, and you need to start today. The writer of Proverbs puts it this way: don't brag about tomorrow, since you don't know what the day will bring. Proverbs 3:28, if you can help your neighbor now, don't say, come back tomorrow, and then I'll help you. He says, don't casually assume that you can get around to it tomorrow or some point in the future, because you don't know. All you have is this moment. That's it. And for some of you in this room, procrastination has become a kind of way of life for you. It's what might be called your own personal culture of delay. There was an article in the news about a guy who returned to his house where he grew up, and he hadn't been there for 20 years, and he was back in his hometown, so he visited his old house, and he goes up to the attic where he looks around and he finds an old jacket of his. He forgot it in the move, and it was still there 20 years later. So he puts it on, and he puts his hand in the pocket, and he pulls out a receipt for a pair of shoes that he had taken to be repaired 20 years earlier, and he forgot about. And so on a whim, he just decides to go back to the shoe repair shop, and it's in his old neighborhood, and it's still there. And the same guy is still working behind the counter that worked there 20 years ago. And so this guy reaches into his pocket, he pulls out the receipt, and he hands it to the man behind the counter. The man goes back to the work area, and he returns to the counter. He says to the guy in the jacket, they'll be ready Friday. It's just a culture of delay. You just get used to it, and you don't even notice it anymore. You just get desensitized to it. You don't even notice that you failed to live here and now. And so you need to make a commitment to action. You need to start today. And so my challenge here is to pick at least one task that you've been putting off. Think about what that might be for you. Maybe it's a project around your house. Maybe it's a financial task. Maybe it's something related to your spiritual life. Maybe it's something at work. Maybe it's relational. And I want to challenge you to divide that task, whatever it is, into small steps. Don't think that you're going to tackle the whole thing. Take on one step, because procrastinators tend to think in terms like of all or nothing. Either I've got to do the whole thing or I can't do anything at all. So just take one small step and take it today. Do it today before you go to bed. And here's what you'll discover: motivation follows action. If you wait to do something until you feel like doing it, until I'm motivated, you're probably going to wait a long time. But if you take action, if you take an action step even before you feel it, you'll discover that you begin to get energized and you begin to get motivated. All right, so the first thing you've got to do is cut yourself off from any excuses and any rationalizations. Second, you need to make a commitment to action. You need to start today. The third thing is, I must ruthlessly prioritize my life. You've got to decide what matters and what doesn't matter. You need to ruthlessly prioritize your life. And this is really a choice of the heart. And you have to decide. I'm going to be serious about this thing. I'm going to live so that my life actually reflects what I say it is that I value. I'm going to live so that if someone looks at my life, they'll see what matters to me. And they'll see what doesn't matter to me. Now, if someone were to look at your life, the way that you're living it right now, maybe the way you've lived it the last week or the last month, what would they discern about your values? What would your activities, the way you spend your time, tell them about what matters to you, about what doesn't matter to you? The truth about us is we get so rushed, we are behind so much, and we have so little time that we don't live out our values. We don't love. We don't treat people with kindness and respect. We don't have time to serve because we're just rushing through life. We violate our own values. It's kind of the society that we live in. People are just so rushed that they violate the values that they say they hold. A woman's in a car at a stoplight and her engine stalls, and she's kind of tying up traffic. And so she gets out, looks under the engine, and the light turns green. And the guy behind her is real impatient, as most of us would probably be, and so he lays on the horn. And she doesn't know what else to do. Finally, she walks back to his car and kind of leans over his window and says to him, "My car is stalled, and I don't know what to do about it. But I'll make you a deal. If you go look at my engine, I'll stay here and honk your horn for you. We violate our own values. We say we're committed to being people of love and civility and decency. If someone looked at your life, what would they say matters to you? And if you're serious about living right now, you're going to have to ruthlessly prioritize your life. And you're going to have to say no to a lot of things in this life. USA Today had a very interesting article a while ago. They surveyed experts in different fields, and they asked them, for the average person, so not like a champion, but like for the average person, how much time do you need to spend sleeping? And so they asked a person who was an expert on sleep. They asked, how much time do you need to spend exercising? And so they asked someone who is an expert on exercise, how much time do you need reading to your kids? So they asked an expert on reading. How much time do you need to spend working on financial management? So they asked a financial expert. So they asked experts in all the different areas of life, what does the average person, like just the average person who wants to do the bare minimum just to get by and be healthy, like what do they need to do? And so they took all this advice on how much time you need to spend on all these key areas of your life, and they added it together, and it came to 36 hours a day. In other words, experts are telling you all the time in articles you read or books you read or television shows you watch how much time you need to spend on all this kinds of stuff. Just doing the minimum is going to take you 36 hours a day. You are going to have to be real ruthless about saying, no, I am not going to do all the stuff that the world is telling me that I need to do. Have you ever just sat down and looked at all the activities that you're engaged in and said, what really matters? Like, what really matters? An expert in time management was speaking to a group of business students, and to drive a point home, he used an illustration that these students will never forget. As he stood in front of the group of these high-powered overachievers, he said, okay, time for a quiz. And he pulled out this large mason jar, and he set it on a table in front of him. And then he took 10 fist-sized rocks, and he carefully placed them in the jar. And when the jar was full, so that you could fit no more rocks inside, he asked, is the jar full? And everyone said yes. And then he reached under the table, and he pulled out a bucket of gravel. He dumped the gravel in and shook the jar, causing pieces of gravel to work themselves down into the spaces between the big rocks. And then he asked once more, is the jar full? And so they were kind of on to him now, and they said, probably not. Good, he replied. So he reached down and he grabbed a bucket of sand, and he started dumping the sand in the jar, and it went down into the spaces left between the rocks and the gravel. Once more, he asked the question, is the jar full? And now they all said no. And once again, he said, good, and then he grabbed a pitcher of water, and he began to pour it until it was filled to the brim. And then he looked at the class, and he asked, what's the point of this illustration? And one of the students raised his hand and said, the point is, no matter how full your schedule is, if you try really hard, you can always fit more things into it. No, the speaker replied, that's not the point. The truth this illustration teaches us is if you don't put the big rocks in first, you will never get them in at all. If you don't put the big rocks in first, you will never get them in at all. Think about your life. What are the big rocks in your life? God, maybe, hopefully. Your children, your marriage, maybe connecting with other people in a community of faith, loving others, maybe your education or your dreams, a worthy cause maybe, teaching or mentoring others, doing things you love, taking time for yourself, maybe your health, maybe a significant other in your life. If you don't remember to put those big rocks in first, you'll never get them in at all. If you sweat the little stuff, the gravel, the sand, then you'll fill your life with these little things that you worry about that don't really matter, that you'll never have real quality time to spend on the big, important stuff, the big rocks. And so today, as you're reflecting on this illustration, just ask yourself the question, what are the big rocks in my life? And then put those in your life this week. Put those in your schedule this week. Carve time out for those this week. I'm so passionate about this subject because I think for most of us in this room, the danger isn't that we're going to defy God. The danger is that we'll waste time on all the small stuff. And that brings me to the next step in this process of learning to live in the now. And this is a step of understanding. This is really a theological truth. You must understand that life is very short. You were made to live forever. You will be eternally alive, but your life here on this earth is very short. An empty nester told me recently, the days are long, the years are short. It's true. The psalmist puts it like this in Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. It's like your life is like that, the psalmist says. It's so short. And what's ironic is that this comes to such a surprise for like every generation. For centuries, for millennia now, they grow up, these generations of people grow up and they grow old and they all ask the same question, where did the time go? Like, what happened to it? It went by so fast. I don't know if you remember the movie City Slickers with Billy Crystal. There's this wonderful scene where he's standing in front of a bunch of little kids in an elementary school class, and he talks to them about time, what he's learned about the passage of time. This is what he says. Value this time, kids, because it's the time when you still have choices. It goes by so fast. When you're a teenager, you'll think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30s, you raise your family. You make a little money. You think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly. You grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud. One of your girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery. You call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you have a major surgery. The music is still too loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anyway. 70s, you and the wife retire to Fort Lauderdale. You start eating dinner at 2 in the afternoon. You have lunch around 10, breakfast the night before. You spend most of your time wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt, muttering, how come my kids don't call? 80s, you have a major stroke, and you end up babbling with some Jamaican nurse who your wife can't stand, but you call mama. Any questions? And the kids just kind of stare at him because they haven't learned yet, but they will. They will learn. The psalmist says it's like grass. It's like it grows up and it's just gone. And so the psalmist says, in light of this truth, that we're made for eternity, but we're only here on this earth for such a brief amount of time, he goes on to say this profound truth. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days. And the idea here is in the world, the business world, it's like you have an object of value. You have an inventory. You have to make a count. You have to take an inventory. You count everything because you don't want anything valuable just to wander off somewhere and not know it. You want to receive their full value when you number them. And the psalmist is saying, God, in light of this fact that you live throughout all of eternity and I have an eternal destiny and life here is so short, I want to possess every day, every moment. I want to live like this is the most precious gift from you that I have, because it is. And I don't want to throw a single one away. I want to possess them thoroughly. I want to number my days. I want to read you something that's very moving. These are reflections of a mom as she was drying her 7-year-old daughter's hair one Saturday night after a bath. And you know how we kind of just rush through some of these kinds of tasks in life. And she started to reflect on that moment, and she started to number that moment. And this is what she wrote. comb and dry, comb and dry. Soon I won't be able to do this anymore, knowing that the little straight hair must inevitably yield to grown-up makeup and grown-up hairstyles. What will she be like in several years when she's 14? What will her hair be like then? Where will it be blowing? Where will her hair be blowing at 16, at 18? You suppose boys will love to watch her hair blow as you do now, and some of them will feel it on their faces, and one of them will marry her, and her hair will be perfect under the veil, and there will be her hair spread out on his pillow. I know how you hate him a little in that moment, and you wonder where he is in that moment and whether he'll be good to her. And they'll grow old together, and that gold brown hair will be gray, and you'll be gone, and then she'll be gone. All flesh is as grass. It's here in the morning, it flourishes, and then it's gone. You'll be gone, and then she'll be gone. This very hair that now in your fingers is smooth, and all the tears of the world that swim for a second in your eyes, as you snatch the plug out of the socket suddenly and gather her into your arms, burying your face in her warm hair, as if you could steal this moment against time. But you can't. You can't steal that moment against time because we're all like grass. Generation after generation come to the end and they all say the same thing. Where did it go? This precious gift of life. What happened to it? How did so much of it slip away? How did the owner of this little hair, these little hands, how did they grow up so fast? And so wise people throughout centuries fall on their knees before God, the God who lives from everlasting to everlasting, and they say, God, teach me this truth. Teach me to number my days. You know, some of you have not yet made a decision about your ultimate commitment in life. You don't know who you want to offer your moments to. You don't understand how to offer your moments to God. And maybe you're just beginning to search for God. Maybe you need more information. And I'm just going to challenge you to get it. I just want to challenge you this morning. I don't want you to leave here without, for once in your life, being very seriously challenged about your spiritual destiny. The ultimate commitment in your life. Don't put it off. People just kind of drift on this one. Don't drift on this one. If you need information, get information. You can go online, you can listen to messages, you can read books, you can talk to one of our leaders here at Blue Oaks. There will be a couple people up by the stage after the service who would be happy to talk with you and pray with you. You can register for our starting point group, and you can talk to Bob, who would love to welcome you into that room. He's into that group. He'll be at the welcome tent as you leave today. Don't put it off. You know, some of you, you know all about God. You know that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for you. You know that you've received forgiveness of your sins, that he offers you fullness of life in this life and life eternal. And you know, it's time for you to make a decision too. For all of us in this room, it's our day. You know, this is our moment. This is the moment we have. We don't have the next one. We can't be guaranteed it. We're just like little blades of grass. But this is our time. You know, others have come before us, others will go after us, but this is our time. And so I want to challenge you to just fall on your knees before God and say to God, God, teach me to number my days. Don't let a single one slip away. Not a single one. Teach me to number my days. Let's pray as the band comes back out and as the ushers come forward to receive the offering. God, I want to ask that for all of us here, that you would teach us to number our days. Teach us how to live in this moment, because we're not guaranteed the next one. Help us to have that kind of perspective on this life here and now. And God, those of us who are living for someday, I pray that we would make a radical change this week, that we would start taking action, and that our emotions and motivation would catch up to our actions, and that you would revolutionize us in this whole area as we start to live for the here and now and not putting off things for tomorrow that we can do today. God, give us the strength to do that. Give us the courage to do that. Help us not to stop because of fear. Help us to kind of lean into that and to do what we know that you're calling us to do. God, thanks for this time now. Thanks for this next song that we're going to sing. I just pray that we would sing it to you as if it were our last and just celebrate who you are. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.